You believe your suffering comes from people, from situations, from what life has done to you. But look closely and you may begin to see something deeper. Two people can face the same situation, yet one lives in peace while the other suffers endlessly. What creates this difference? It is not the world outside, it is the world within. Your mind speaks all day without rest. It creates stories, fears, expectations, and memories. It holds on to pain long after the moment has passed, and slowly, without you noticing, it turns small problems into heavy burdens. You are not suffering because of life itself. You are suffering because of how your mind holds on to it. But there is a quiet truth that few understand. You are not your thoughts, and the moment you see this clearly, something begins to change. The noise softens, the weight becomes lighter, and a deep sense of peace begins to appear without needing to control anything. 1. Your thoughts are not always the truth. Most people live their entire lives trusting every word the mind speaks. When the mind says you are not enough, they believe it. When the mind says no one truly cares for you, they accept it as fact. When the mind says this pain will never end, they stop looking for a way through. But here is something worth sitting with quietly. Just because a thought appears inside your head does not make it true. Thoughts are not facts, they are movements, like clouds passing across a wide and open sky. The sky does not become the cloud, and you are not the thought that passes through you. Think of the last time your mind told you something terrible was about to happen. Perhaps it warned you that someone was losing interest in you, or that a situation was about to fall apart. And then, nothing happened. The feared outcome never arrived. But the suffering was very real while you were inside it. That suffering was not caused by the event. It was caused entirely by the story the mind invented around an uncertainty. This is the mind's nature. It fills in the unknown with fear. And when you do not question those feelings, you live as though the fears are already real. There is also a kind of mental habit where the mind takes one small piece of evidence and builds an entire conclusion around it. Someone does not reply to your message and the mind declares they no longer value you. You make one mistake and the mind announces you are fundamentally flawed. A plan does not work out and the mind concludes nothing will ever work for you. These are not truths. They are exaggerations, distortions created by a mind that has not been gently questioned. The thought feels so convincing in the moment that you forget to ask, is this actually real or is this just a story? Learning to question your thoughts does not mean fighting them or pushing them away. It means sitting with them the way you might sit with a child who is frightened, with calm presence, with curiosity, without immediately believing every word of the fear. You can ask softly, is this thought serving me? Is this thought accurate? Is there another way to see this moment? These are not aggressive questions. They are gentle invitations for the mind to pause before it decides. And in that pause, something important happens. A small but real space opens up between you and the thought. And in that space, you find your freedom. The mind is also deeply influenced by the state of the body. When you are tired, the mind's voice becomes harsher. When you are hungry or anxious, the stories it tells become darker. When you have not rested, every difficulty seems permanent. Understanding this connection is part of learning not to believe every thought. Before you accept the mind's conclusion about your life, ask first, how is my body right now? How long have I been inside my own head without a breath of fresh air, without stillness, without rest? Often what feels like a deep truth is simply a tired mind, confused and searching for something steady to hold. So begin very gently to practice this. When a thought arrives that feels heavy or frightening, pause before accepting it. Do not argue with it. Do not chase it. Simply notice it. The way you might notice a sound in another room. Give it a little distance. Watch it from the edge rather than walking into the center of it. Over time, This small act of gentle witnessing changes everything. You begin to see that thoughts come and go, rise and fall, appear and dissolve, all on their own, without your permission. And if they dissolve on their own, they cannot be the truth of who you are. They are simply passing visitors, and you are the quiet space they pass through. 2. The mind repeats what you refuse to release. Have you ever noticed how the mind returns again and again to the same hurt? Someone said something cruel to you years ago, and somehow, in certain moments, the mind replays it as though it just happened. A failure from the past arrives again in the quiet of the night. A moment of embarrassment surfaces in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, uninvited and unwanted. You did not choose to remember these things, and yet the mind brings them back with remarkable faithfulness, as if it is trying to finish something that was never fully resolved. This repetition is not cruelty. It is the mind's signal that something inside still needs your gentle attention. The mind repeats what the heart has not yet made peace with. This is important to understand because so many people try to stop the repetition by simply thinking harder, by analyzing the past event from every angle, by trying to understand every detail, by rehearsing what they should have said or done differently. But this approach does not release the memory, it feeds it. The more you examine a wound without healing it, the more alive the wound becomes. The mind keeps returning not because it enjoys the pain, but because it is waiting for something different, not more analysis, but acceptance, not more thinking, but a quiet release. Imagine holding a stone tightly in your fist. After a while, your hand aches. The logical response is to open the hand and set the stone down. But when it comes to painful memories and unresolved emotions, people often grip tighter instead of releasing. They hold the hurt close because releasing it feels like saying the pain was acceptable. It feels like forgiving what should not be forgiven. But this is a misunderstanding of what release truly means. Letting go of a memory does not mean what happened was right. It means you are choosing not to let it continue shaping your present. You are setting down the stone, not because the stone was light, but because your hand deserves to rest. There is something in the human mind that believes, if I hold on to this long enough, something will change. If I replay the conversation enough times, I will finally find the right response. If I revisit the betrayal enough, I will eventually understand why it happened. But this is a quiet illusion. The past does not change with more remembering. The answer you are searching for does not live in the replay, and the peace you are waiting for cannot arrive while the mind is still living in what has already ended. The past is finished. The only place it continues to live is in the mind that refuses to let it go. What makes releasing difficult is that many people have unconsciously tied their identity to their pain. The story of what happened to them has become the story of who they are. To let go of the suffering feels like letting go of themselves. But consider this with care. You are not the wound. You are not the disappointment. You are not the collection of things that went wrong. These events touched your life, but they are not your life. Beneath every painful story, the mind keeps repeating, there is a deeper self that was never harmed, never diminished, never made less than whole. And that self does not need the story to know its own worth. So when the mind returns to something painful, as it will because this is its nature, try not to fight it or shame yourself for remembering. Simply notice, here it is again. Acknowledge it with the gentleness you would offer a tired child who woke in the night from a bad dream. You do not need to enter the dream again. You do not need to relive every detail. You can simply say, very quietly inside yourself, I see you. I understand you are still there. But I do not have to go back with you this time. And with each time you offer that gentle refusal, the mind's grip on the past becomes a little looser, a little less certain, a little more willing to let the old weight go. 3. Overthinking creates suffering that doesn't exist. There is a particular kind of suffering that is entirely created inside the mind. And it is perhaps the most exhausting of all because it is fought against problems that do not yet exist. Overthinking is the mind's way of preparing for a future it fears. It runs through every possible scenario, every worst outcome, every way something could go wrong. And it does this not once but dozens of times, in dozens of variations. By the time the actual moment arrives, if it arrives at all, the person has already lived through the suffering 100 times inside their head. And yet the outer event may be entirely ordinary or may never come at all. Think of a person lying awake at 3 in the morning. The room is quiet, nothing is happening, no danger is present, but the mind is working furiously, replaying a conversation from earlier in the day, imagining how tomorrow might unfold, constructing arguments for conflicts that have not yet occurred. The body begins to feel the weight of all this thinking. The chest tightens. The breath becomes shallow. The whole being is responding as if something real and present is happening, and yet nothing is happening at all. This is the extraordinary and sobering power of the overthinking mind. It can create genuine physical suffering from things that exist only in thought. Overthinking often disguises itself as productivity. It feels like preparation. It tells you, if I think about this enough, I will find the answer. If I analyze every angle, I will be safe. If I plan for every possibility, nothing will catch me off guard. And so you think and think and think, convinced that more thinking will eventually bring relief. But it rarely does, because the mind that is searching for certainty through thought is looking in the wrong place. Certainty is not found in the future, no matter how carefully you try to predict it. It is found only in the present moment, in the simple, unchangeable fact of right now. There is a story of a monk who was asked, "What do you do when difficult thoughts come?" He smiled and said, "I make them tea." This small, gentle image holds great wisdom. When you stop fighting your thoughts and simply acknowledge them, invite them in, look at them calmly, give them a moment, you take away their power to overwhelm you. The thought that is fought grows. The thought that is simply witnessed, without panic, without argument, tends to settle on its own. The problem with overthinking is not the thinking itself, but the urgency, the feeling that every thought must be immediately solved, resolved, or acted upon. Much of what the mind worries about falls into two categories: things that have already happened and cannot be changed, and things that have not happened yet and may never come. The present moment, the only place where life is actually occurring, receives very little of the overthinking mind's attention. It is always somewhere else, always in a conversation that ended yesterday, or a confrontation that might happen tomorrow. And so life passes by quietly, right here, right now, while the mind is elsewhere. The flowers by the path are not seen. The warmth of a shared meal is not felt. The beauty of an ordinary moment is missed entirely because the mind is too busy suffering over what is not here. To begin freeing yourself from overthinking, you do not need to become a person who never thinks. Thinking is not the enemy. The mind is a beautiful and necessary gift. What is needed is a relationship with thought that is different, one where you are the observer of thinking rather than the prisoner of it. Begin by noticing the moment when thinking becomes circular, when you realize you have visited this thought before and nothing new has arrived. That is the signal to step back, to breathe, to bring your attention very simply to what is in front of you right now. Not the past, not the future, just this breath, just this moment, just this, which is already always enough. 4. Awareness is the first step to freedom. There is something remarkable that happens the moment you truly notice what your mind is doing. Not judge it, not try to stop it. Simply notice. You are washing your hands, and you realize the mind has already wandered 3 days ahead into an imaginary argument. You are eating a meal, and you notice the mind is somewhere in last week, rehearsing a regret. This act of noticing, simple, quiet, without drama, is the beginning of everything, because you cannot change what you cannot see. And most people live their entire lives inside the movements of their mind without ever stepping back far enough to observe them from the outside. Awareness is not a complicated spiritual practice. It does not require years of meditation or a particular setting or special knowledge. It is available to you in this very moment, in whatever ordinary situation you find yourself. It is simply the act of pausing, even for one breath, and asking, what is happening inside me right now? What is the mind doing? What is it saying? What feeling is present? This brief pause, this small act of honest observation, interrupts the automatic momentum of the mind. And in that interruption, you discover something extraordinary. You are not the thoughts. You are the one who is watching them, and the watcher is always at peace. There is a difference between being lost in a forest and standing at the edge of a forest. When you are lost inside it, every tree looks the same, every direction feels the same, and fear grows because you cannot see where you are. But when you stand at the edge and look in, you can see the shapes, the patterns, the spaces between the trees. Awareness does the same thing for the mind. When you are lost inside your thoughts, you cannot see them clearly. They feel like reality. But when you step back into the quiet position of the observer, the thoughts begin to look different, smaller, more temporary, less absolute. They are no longer the entire forest. They are just trees. Many people are afraid of what they will find if they look too closely at their own minds. They fear that awareness will reveal something unbearable, a darkness too deep, a sadness too vast, an emptiness too frightening. But this fear is itself just another thought. In reality, the honest observation of your mind almost never reveals a monster. What it reveals most often is something much simpler and much more human. A tired person who has been carrying too much for too long. A heart that has been trying very hard to hold everything together. A self that is doing the best it can with the understanding it has. And seeing this with awareness brings not fear but compassion. Awareness also changes your relationship with emotions. Without it, emotions feel like permanent states. When you are sad, it feels as though you have always been sad and will always be sad. When you are anxious, the anxiety feels like your identity. But with awareness, you begin to notice that emotions move. They arise, they peak, and they pass. Every single time, without exception. No feeling, no matter how intense, stays forever at its highest point. When you observe this clearly, even once, something fundamental shifts. You stop identifying with the feeling and start observing its movement. And a person who can observe their own emotional weather without being swept away by it has found something truly precious. So practice awareness the way you practice breathing, naturally, consistently, without force. Throughout your day, take small moments to simply check in with yourself, not to fix anything, not to analyze anything, just to notice. Notice the quality of your thoughts right now. Notice whether the mind is tight or spacious. Notice where in the body you are carrying tension. These small moments of honest noticing accumulate over time into something profound, a growing familiarity with your own inner landscape, a deepening ease with what you find there, and a quiet confidence that you can meet whatever arises inside you without being destroyed by it. This is the slow and steady gift of awareness, and it begins always with one simple breath of attention. 5. Letting go is a skill you must practice. People often speak of letting go as though it is a single grand gesture, one decisive moment where you release the weight and walk forward free. But this is a romantic misunderstanding of how the heart actually heals. Letting go is not a moment, it is a practice. It is something you do quietly, repeatedly, imperfectly, and with great patience. Not once, but many times, with the same thought, the same hurt, the same fear. Some things you will release and then pick back up again the very next day. This is not failure. This is the honest, humble nature of learning. And the willingness to begin again each time without self-condemnation is itself the practice. Think of a hand that has been clenched into a fist for a very long time. When you first try to open it, the fingers resist. There is stiffness, even a kind of pain in the unclenching. The muscles have become accustomed to holding. This is exactly what happens when you try to release long-held thoughts, beliefs, or pain. There is resistance, not because you are weak, but because the holding became familiar. The familiar always feels safer than the open, even when the open is where freedom lives. Letting go is the slow, patient work of teaching the inner hand to trust what comes when it is no longer clenching so tightly. One of the deepest obstacles to letting go is the belief that by releasing something, you are saying it did not matter, that the pain was not real, that the person who hurt you was right, or that what was lost was not worth grieving. But this belief keeps people stuck for years, holding on tightly to prove that something mattered. Here is the quiet truth. You can let something go completely and still know in the deepest part of yourself that it was real, that it mattered, that it changed you. Letting go does not erase what happened. It simply removes the suffering that continues long after the event has ended. It does not deny the past. It releases the past's hold on the present. Letting go also requires a certain courage, the courage to step into uncertainty. When you hold on to familiar pain, there is a strange kind of comfort in it. You know exactly how it feels. You know its shape, its weight, its rhythm. The unknown beyond it feels larger and more frightening than the pain you already know. But consider what lives in that unknown. It is simply the present moment without the overlay of old suffering. It is your life as it actually is, not as the mind has interpreted it through layers of unresolved hurt. The courage to move toward that, even tentatively, even imperfectly, is the most important step in the practice of releasing. There is a gentleness required in letting go that people often underestimate. Many approach it as a battle, wrestling with thoughts, forcing themselves not to feel, demanding that the mind stop returning to what it returns to. But force does not open a clenched hand. Gentleness does. When you approach your own pain with softness, when you say to yourself with real kindness, I understand why I held on to this. I understand how it protected me, and I am ready now to try something different. The holding loosens more naturally than any amount of effort could produce. Compassion for yourself is not weakness in this process. It is the very mechanism through which release becomes possible. Every time you notice a thought arising and choose, gently, not to follow it into the old familiar story, that is the practice of letting go. Every time you feel the pull of a past hurt and choose, instead, to place your attention on what is real and present right now, that is letting go. Every time you catch the mind building a fearful future, and bring it quietly back to the simplicity of this breath, this moment, this room, that is letting go. You will not always succeed. There will be days when the mind pulls hard and you follow. But every time you begin again, every time you return to the practice with patience rather than judgment, you strengthen the quiet muscle of release, and slowly over time, what once held you so tightly begins to simply soften. 6. Peace begins when the mind becomes quiet. Most people have never truly experienced a quiet mind. They have experienced distraction, exhaustion, numbness, sleep, but genuine inner quiet, the kind where the mind is simply still and alert and present, without agenda or commentary, this is something rare. And yet it is this quality of quiet that every human heart is secretly longing for. Not the quiet of having no problems, not the silence of isolation, but the deep, living stillness that exists beneath all the noise the mind creates. It is always there. It does not need to be created. It only needs to be uncovered, like clearing the surface of still water so its depth becomes visible. The mind that is constantly active is like a lake surface churned by wind. You cannot see to the bottom. You cannot see your own reflection clearly. Every time you try to look, the surface moves again. But when the wind settles, when the movement becomes still, the lake becomes a mirror. You can see clearly all the way down. This is what inner quiet does for the person who discovers it. It does not remove the depth of your feelings or the complexity of your experience. It simply stills the surface long enough for you to see truly yourself, your life, what actually matters, what can be released. And from this clarity, wisdom arises naturally without effort. People often believe that quiet must be earned, that it can only come after all the problems are solved, all the relationships are healed, all the uncertainties are resolved. But this is precisely backwards. Quiet is not the reward for a finished life. It is the foundation from which a better life becomes possible. When the mind is quiet, you make better choices. You respond to difficulty with more grace. You see people more clearly and treat them more kindly. You hear your own deepest knowing, the part of you that always understands what is true and right, but is so often drowned out by the noise of worry and analysis and constant inner commentary. There is a practice that many people associate with peace but never actually try because they believe they are not the type for it. They say, "I cannot meditate, my mind is too busy." But this is exactly like saying, "I cannot clean this room, it is too messy." The busyness of the mind is not a disqualification from the practice of stillness. It is the very reason to begin. You do not need to achieve a perfectly quiet mind to benefit from the practice of sitting still and observing. You only need to sit and breathe and watch, without demanding that the mind immediately cooperate. Because over time, with patient repetition, the mind does begin to settle. Not because you forced it, because you stopped adding to the noise. Inner quiet also changes how you experience other people. When the mind is noisy, every interaction is filtered through its constant commentary. You are judging, comparing, defending, interpreting, all while the other person is still speaking. You are rarely fully present with anyone because the mind is always partially elsewhere. But in moments of genuine quiet, you are simply here. You hear what is actually being said. You feel what the other person is actually feeling. You respond from a place of real attention rather than automatic reaction. And people feel this difference even if they cannot name it. They feel seen, heard, met, because for once the mind's noise did not stand between you and them. So let quietness be something you return to again and again throughout the ordinary moments of your day. You do not need a special place or a long time. You need only a breath, one conscious breath, taken deliberately with full attention. In that one breath, the mind pauses. In that pause, however brief, the noise reduces. And in that reduction, even for just a moment, you touch the peace that has been waiting beneath all the noise all along. It was never absent, it was only covered, and each time you return to it, through a breath, through a moment of stillness, through the simple choice to stop and be here, you remember something true and important. Peace is not something you must find. It is something you already are when the mind grows quiet enough to let you feel it. In the end, the mind is a powerful tool, but it becomes a source of suffering when left unobserved. It will replay the past, fear the future, and create problems that may never come. But you do not have to follow every thought it creates. You can simply watch and let it pass. When you stop believing every thought, you begin to feel a new kind of freedom. Life becomes lighter, calmer, and more present. You no longer fight your mind, you understand it. And in that understanding, peace naturally grows. So do not try to silence your mind by force. Instead, learn to observe it with patience. Because the moment you stop holding on to every thought is the moment your suffering begins to fade.